when we differentiate as teachers, quite often we start from the higher levels and try and differentiate down. But actually, if you start at sensory level and differentiate up, then you can really include everybody. And it has, the sensory stuff is useful for the people who can't access the stuff further up. But for the people who can access further up, this is really going to underpin it and sort of stick it in their memories.
So I just want to start off by asking you to introduce who you are and what your company and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Jo Grace and I run a thing called the Sensory Projects, which is all about sharing the knowledge and little bits of creativity that people need to use sensory resources as effective tools for inclusion.
Wow. And who do you normally pitch it at? Because I know you do some with babies, but is it a wide range of?
So I'm not a company, I'm just me. And I mostly work with special schools and adult care settings. I do a lot of speech and language therapy teams, and I also get a lot of bookings from the heritage sector. So like I've done training for Hampton Court Palace and Kensington.
Oh, wow.
Because the storytelling element and being inclusive is something that those settings are interested in. But it has a relevance across the board, really.
Absolutely. So when you say sensory, could you elaborate on what you mean by that? So imagine, I'm an NQT or a trainee teacher. Could you break it down for me?
So one of the things I'm known for is sharing sensory stories. And those are concise text. So you get a story that's told in sort of 8 to 10 sentences. And then each sentence will be partnered with a rich and relevant sensory experience. And it's that richness. It's very tricky because, obviously anything can be sensory. Like I've got chocolate, I can see chocolate, I can taste chocolate. But as a visual experience, chocolate's really not that great. So you're thinking of something that is like capital letter sensory, like really sensory, and then you use that to tell a narrative, or you're looking at how the sensory world. Actually, our recent experience of lockdown, where a lot of people have felt more anxious than usual, a lot of people who wouldn't ordinarily notice their sort of sensory selves have become more aware of things that they're bothered by or things that they find comforting. And so our senses have a role to play in our mental well-being as well, across the board.
How interesting. So how important would you say sensory development and appealing to the senses is important to children and learning?
Oh, well, for learning, it's brilliant. I am a primary school teacher by trade. And so if you are using your senses when you're learning, and obviously we're always using our senses, you're looking, you're smelling, but it's that difference. I need another word. I need that capital letter sensory world. If you're using your senses whilst you're learning, quite literally, more of your brain is involved in your learning. And when more of your brain is active, then the activity is more interesting. So you're more likely to be engaged, you're more likely to concentrate. And when more of your brain is being used, you're more likely to remember it. And it's a good example when I talk about it on training days, is you ask adults, what lesson do you remember from school? And it'll be like the one with the Bunsen burner or the drama lesson. It will be the one that had the sensory richness to it. And even just down to very simple things like working with concrete resources. Maths is a good example for this one. When we're teaching maths, we quite often use physical objects to teach, counting in its early learning is bricks moved across. And as soon as we've understood that this is an abstract thing or can be done in the abstract, we remove those physical objects. And actually there's a huge benefit to keeping them there, because the concreteness, just that extra, I am touching something, I am moving something, that bit of extra engagement puts things in your brain stronger.
Wow. So it sounds to me like, from what I'm getting from what you're saying, is that it's really, really important to plan for those sensory opportunities within a lesson.
Yeah. The feedback, what you get back from doing that is massive. And we're quite good at thinking about what a lesson will look like, but in just little things like, can you put a smell in? When you're I don't know, like a history lesson where you're doing the Great Fire of London and get some smell of wood smoke into that, and people will remember that lesson more than if you just sort of pointed at pictures on a board.
Do you know what? I just want to come and sit in one of your lessons, to be honest. I know from when I taught, you're absolutely right. I think it's a two-way thing, isn't it? It's not just the person that's receiving that lesson and the children that are in that lesson, but also the adults who are delivering that, how much more fun it is and how much more engaging it is for both parties. And I think you're absolutely right. I think the combination can only lead to good things and to learning, and you're absolutely right. So could you just explain what a sensory story, if I was to plan one, how would I go about doing that?
You're asking somebody who can talk about that for about a week to be concise. So one of the things that you need to do is use concise text. So I'm sort of a practice what I preach, not what I'm capable of. A sensory story is typically told in about 8 to 10 sentences. And they are a wonderfully inclusive resource. So I use them with children who have profound and multiple learning disabilities, who don't use traditional forms of language, don't have access to meaning in the way that we have access to meaning. But I've also used them with mainstream university students. So I get excited by how inclusive they can be. Like I have a sensory story on the sensory projects that's called The Birth of a Star. And I often tell it at big conferences and things like this, and it's 7 sentences long, and you wouldn't think you can get much across in 7 sentences, but in 7 sentences I can tell you how stars are formed in stellar nurseries, and I had physicists help me write it, so it's scientifically accurate, and the sensory experiences that go with those 7 sentences also, it's not like, you know, with the picture book, the pictures support the words. With a sensory story, you're aiming that the sensory experiences tell the story as well. It's not a supporting act. The meaning is carried equally. So like the first sentence in Before a Star is Born is, before a star is born, it is a huge cloud of hydrogen gas. And so what I share when I share that experience is I'll throw up a handful of confetti, or when I do a big conference, I have a confetti cannon and I blast the whole room with a confetti cannon, or I have white hole punchings and a UV torch. And actually, if you throw a handful of white hole punchings up and light them under UV, you know, it looks like a firework going off. It's an amazing visual experience. And in terms of the scientific accuracy, because I asked the physicists about all of my sensory experiences, they were saying the dispersal of the confetti in the particle, the dispersal of the particles in the hydrogen cloud is very similar to the dispersal of the confetti in the confetti cloud. And so what you're visually seeing is representative of that meaning. And then you think about the understanding that's just there in that, you know, that's particle dispersion. So you can study particle dispersion by throwing up handfuls of confetti or chucking a load of ball pool balls across the floor or sprinkling sand around. That's all particle dispersion. And then you could build that up. And I think this is one of the things when we differentiate as teachers, quite often we start from the higher levels and try and differentiate down. But actually, if you start at a sensory level and differentiate up, then you can really include everybody. And it has, you know, the sensory stuff is relevant, is useful for the people who can't access the stuff further up. But for the people who can access further up, this is really going to underpin it and sort of stick it in their memory. So you go from particle dispersion that's blowing bubbles is particle dispersion, isn't it? To that thing that you do with children where you get them all to sort of stand very close together and hold hands so that they're a solid, and then have a bit more energy and they're a liquid, and then run around the room like crazy people and they're a gas. And you can keep going. You can push it all the way to, you know, doing research about particle theory online. And actually, one of the scientists who helped me write that story is a leading particle physicist, and his research involves shaking sand in a box. And so it's almost like it comes full circle. When you get to that sort of very kind of upper echelons of stuff, it goes back to studying reality in very fine detail. And, you know, I have autistic children that I work with who, when the confetti goes up, they're absolutely fascinated. And they would repeat that and watch that and watch that. And you can pathologize that and say, look, that's an unusual behavior. I look at it and go, scientists They're just the same. It's just in a different context. It's a real skill to be able to focus and concentrate like that. So it's fun stuff. You asked me how to write a sensory story, and I went off on a tangent. Concise sentences partnered with sensory experiences.
And I think it's so lovely to hear your passion, and it's made me instantly reflect on how I would plan future lessons, and it's almost got me really excited about thinking. And I've also sort of, just when listening to you speak there, I was thinking of when I taught the book The Firework Maker's Daughter, and we actually had fireworks, as part of the sensory, and they went off, and then we did poetry around it. So I completely understand what you mean, but I think it's so important what you're saying, and I think that needs to be embedded into the curriculum somehow. It's absolutely amazing, and honestly, I can't thank you enough.
That's all right.
I know it's a huge topic, and you've given a snippet and a taster of what you do, but honestly, I think that will certainly ignite so many teachers into thinking about how they're going to plan their lessons, and I absolutely love it. And
I'm always very willing to chat to people. I do the work that I do because I love it so much.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found it enjoyable and useful. In the comment box below, please put a question or a comment about the video. To grow our community more and help other teachers out there, please subscribe to the channel and share our posts and videos. Thank you.